Section 3.3.RA-3. Now, a sample of college students was asked how much they spent monthly on delivered Thai food. We want to now approximate the standard deviation for the cost. So, if you look over here on the left-hand side, we have the 5 classes, which go from 10 to $19.99, 20 to $19.99, $29.99, all the way to 50 to $59.99. And then we can see what the number of students there are for each particular class. So there's 6 for the 10 to $19.99, 17 for the 20 to $29.99, and so on. So the first thing we need to do is we need to determine what is the mean or the sample mean. But we need to add the total of this first column. So when we add that total, and we add up 6 plus 17 plus 29 plus 15 plus 6, we're going to get 73. Okay, so now we're going to now create 2 new columns to find the mean. We have our midpoint, and then we're going to take our midpoint and multiply it by the frequency. Now, how do we find the midpoint? Well, the midpoint is to take the sum of the lower class limits and divide it by 2. So we take 10 plus 20 divided by 2 to give us 15. And so then we're going to take this 15, and then we're going to multiply it by the frequency of 6 to give us 90. Okay, next we're going to take, again, the 2 midpoints. So the midpoint of 20 and 30, so 20 plus 30 divided by 2 gives us 25. So we're going to take the midpoint of 25 and then multiply it by the frequency of 17 to get 425. Next, we're going to take 30 and then 40. So 30 plus 40 divided by 2 is going to give us the midpoint of that class, which is 35. So we're going to take 35 and multiply it by the frequency of 29 to get 1015. The next midpoint is between 40 and 50. So we're going to take 40 divided by 2, 40 plus 50 divided by 2, which is equal to 45. So we get a midpoint of 45, and then we're going to multiply it by the frequency of 15 to get the total of 675. The last class is now 50 to $69.99, and the reason why is because we want to include that midpoint of 60. So technically it has a 0 of frequency, but what it does is it allows us to now find the next midpoint, which is going to be 50 plus 60 divided by 2 to give us 55. So therefore we have 55, which is the midpoint. We're going to multiply it by the frequency of 6 to get 330. Okay, now in order to find the mean, we have to find the total of the last column here. So when we add 90 plus 425 plus 1015 plus 675 plus 330, well, that's going to give us the total of 2,535. So therefore, that's what the total of the last column represents. And we know the total of the frequency is going to be 73. So in order to find the mean, what we need to do is we need to take the numerator, which is the sum of the last column, which is 2,535. And then what we're going to do is we're going to divide that by the sum of the frequencies, which is 73. And therefore, we get the mean of 34.73. Okay, now this gives us the sample mean. What we want to do in this problem, we want to be able to solve the sample standard deviation. So we got to create more columns. So there's going to be 3 new columns. We have the next column, which represents the sample mean. And then the next column is taking the midpoint and subtracting the sample mean. In the last column, we're going to take the midpoint, subtract the sample mean and square it, and then multiply it by the frequency. But in the sample mean, we found it to be 34.73. So that means that every one of those values for the sample mean is now going to be 34.73. Okay, so now we're going to put that in for the sample mean that we end up solving. So therefore, they're set 34.73 and so on. So let's just go ahead and highlight that. Okay, so we have 34.73, and therefore there is the sample mean. Okay, now the next column we want to do is we want to take the midpoint and then subtract the sample mean. And then in the last column, we're going to take that value and square it and then multiply it by the frequency. So let's go ahead and do that. So we know that the midpoint is 15. We know that what we want to do is we want to subtract the sample mean, which is 34.73. And then what we're going to end up is with negative 19.73. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this negative 19.73 and then we're going to square it, and then we're going to multiply it by the frequency. And then once we do that, then we're going to get the total of 2,335.62. Okay, now we're going to move down to the next part. Okay, now we're going to look at the next midpoint. So the next midpoint is 25. And then again, we're going to subtract the sample mean of 34.73. And that's going to give us negative 9.73. So we're going to take this negative 9.73 and then square it. And then we're going to multiply that by the frequency, which is 17. And when we multiply that together, then we get 1,609.39. Okay, next, we're going to take the next midpoint, which is 35, and then we're going to subtract the sample mean of 34.73 to give us a result of 0.27. So we're going to take 0.27 and square it, and then multiply it by the frequency of 29 to give us a result of 2.03. Next, the next midpoint is 45. And now we're going to subtract the sample mean of 34.73 to give us the result of 10.27. We're going to take 10.27, square it, and then multiply by the frequency of 15 to give us the result of 1,582.05. Okay, and then the last one. The last midpoint is 55. Again, we're going to subtract the sample mean of 34.74 to give us 20.27. We're going to take that 20.27 next column and then square it, and then we're going to multiply it by the frequency of 6 to give us the result of 2,465.72. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to look at the formula here. Okay, so the formula is the sum of the last column divided by the sum of the frequency minus 1, since we're dealing with the sample mean. This is the sample mean formula. Okay, so therefore we're finding a sample, and if you look up in the question, it says sample, so you need to be careful on which formula that you use. Again, since it's a sample, now we need to total up the numbers from the last column. So when we total up the numbers in the last column, we're going to get the following. We're going to get the sum of this is going to be 7,994.31. So what we're going to do is the numerator is now going to be representative of the following. The numerator is 7,994.31. Okay, and then we're going to take the sum of the frequency. So we have the sum of the frequency, which is 73, and then we're going to subtract 1. So in our calculator, what we're going to do, okay, is do the following. So we're going to take the square root, or we can say 7,994.31, and we're going to divide that by 73 minus 1, which is 72. And then we're going to take the square root of this answer. So we're going to say second, and then the square root button, and then I'm going to say second, and then the blue says answer, and then we're going to hit enter. Okay, and so what does this tell us? Well, this gives us the following number. Okay, so let me go ahead and copy this number here. So this is what we get for the standard deviation. But they ask us to round it to 2 decimal places, so we round it to the 100th place, so therefore we end up getting a sample standard deviation of 10.54.